Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Andy's YouTube for another episode of Food Skepticism. Today's episode, I'm not going to tell you just yet. I want you to actually guess. So, this condition causes damage to your blood vessels and your heart. It's a leading cause of heart attack, heart failure, stroke, and kidney failure, just to name a few. And it's uncontrolled in over half of Americans who have it. So, what is it? It's high blood pressure. Now, most people don't think that highly of high blood pressure, right? They don't think that much of it. It's so many people have it that we've actually sort of come to think, oh, this is a normal thing. But it's anything but. Traditionally, humans have always eaten lots of fresh fruits and vegetables and things like that and limited their sodium. So, the idea of high blood pressure has risen dramatically in the Western world over the last, say, century or so, and namely due to our dietary changes and lifestyle changes. Anyway, so today is Saturday, February 8th, 2020. This is episode 15, hypertension, or high blood pressure, whichever you want to call it. So, a little brief overview. We're going to talk about what is hypertension. We're going to talk about how your blood pressure is taken, the prevalence or commonality of high blood pressure, the etiology or the origins of it, risk factors, signs and symptoms, treatment, and takeaways. So, what is hypertension? It's called by many names: high blood pressure, essential hypertension. HTN is an abbreviation for it, so is HBP. It's also referred to as benign, essential, or primary hypertension. Primary just means hypertension exists in and of itself. Secondary hypertension is usually caused by another disease state that destabilizes, like, for example, kidney disease or something. Now, what's kind of ironic, and I would say it's even a bit of a misnomer, is calling it benign because it's anything but. But anyway, at least 140 over 90 would be your blood pressure cutoff to be considered high blood pressure. Anything higher than that, it's still high blood pressure. But or some doctors, I should tell you, even consider you to have high blood pressure if you have other risk factors like really high cholesterol or something, and also a blood pressure of 130 over 80. And the reason for that is high blood pressure causes damages to vessel function, and you can kind of think of it as almost like, I guess, like sanding a painted wall before you paint it, right? You sand down the surface of it. It sort of creates like little micro imperfections and scratches and stuff in the surface, and that allows the new fresh paint to adhere to it better. Well, similar to the inside of your blood vessels, where you damage it with high blood pressure. Let's say you've also got high cholesterol, then boom, what do you know? That cholesterol just sticks right to it like a spackle and builds up, and then you have a heart attack or a stroke. So you can see how they're related. Anyway, I should tell you that if you have a blood pressure of at least 180 over 120, this is emergency, right? It's also something we call a hypertensive crisis. So if you have that, go to the emergency room right now. Anyway, just a few details here. When you get your high blood pressure taken, your top number is called systolic. That's the blood pressure when your left ventricle contracts, right, and squeezes down and pumps blood out of that ventricle. Your bottom number is called the diastolic, which is actually sort of like the filling blood pressure. It's the phase between contractions when it's actually resting. And you've got a nice little diagram here so you can see. Ventricles, just so you know, are like the bottom chambers of the heart. The atrium are the top chambers of the heart. Anyway, prevalence, about 30% of adults in the United States are diagnosed with it, or estimated to have it. And it's controlled in less than half of them, about only 49% of them actually. So this is a serious thing, and not only that, but most people are not getting the treatment or are not pursuing the treatment that they really should for this very dangerous condition. Etiology or the origin of it, with most people, it's frankly overconsumption of sodium from processed foods. It's not even so much table salt. Like most people probably don't know that the biggest contributor to sodium in your diet isn't table salt and what you add to it, but it's actually the sodium contained within the foods. And fun fact, furthermore, is that a lot of your processed foods that are high in sodium won't even taste salty. So it's very difficult to tell how much sodium it actually has unless you read the nutrition label, which I will teach you how to do in future lectures, unless you've already kind of figured it out by winging it. Anyway, another common cause of it is low potassium, and dietary potassium typically comes from fresh fruits and vegetables and other plant foods. So just as essential to lowering your sodium is raising the amount of potassium you get from fresh plants in your diet. It's another reason why I do not recommend at all so-called carnivore diets or things like that, keto diets that are really, really high in protein and low in plant foods. But anyway, high blood pressure can also be secondary to another disease state, as I mentioned before. But we're not really going to dwell on secondary hypertension here. We're talking mostly about primary hypertension because that's primarily, no pun intended, what people have. Anyway, signs and symptoms. It's very common for people to have none at all. It's called a silent killer for a reason. Is that a lot of people won't feel like there's anything wrong with them. It's because the damage is being done under the cover, right? But in severe cases of high blood pressure, people can have headaches, they can have anxiety, shortness of breath, or SOB, as you might see on a form. That's what it's abbreviated as. They can have a nosebleed or something that's very common, a pulsation sensation in the neck or the head. Um, you might sort of think of it as like it almost feels like this is a second heartbeat in your head or neck. So treatment typically involves medications like antihypertensives. Before that, they usually prefer to control it with lifestyle modifications because naturally there are no side effects to the lifestyle modifications. There are always side effects with medications. But anyway, some of the lifestyle modifications mentioned already. Um, One thing you should note about sodium is it's virtually impossible, and I mean this, it's virtually impossible to not get enough sodium. Actually, there is a condition called hyponatremia, which means low sodium concentration, but that's caused actually by people who overhydrate, usually after athletic events. It's not caused by getting too little sodium typically. Anyway, the AI, or what's called the adequate intake, is not as strong as an RDA, which is a recommended dietary allowance. That's because there's not enough evidence to support an RDA. But an AI, what's considered adequate, is 1,500 milligrams in adults. It also happens to be that's a good target to stay under. You can increase your potassium with plants. Please do not take supplements, but there is no RDA for potassium, so just go ahead and eat as much as honestly, plenty of fruits and vegetables. Just go for it. And you can limit your caffeine. The effects of caffeine on blood pressure are typically transient, which means they come and go very quickly after the caffeine wears off. But still, a lot of people, doctors, especially older ones, they don't like to see people drink a ton of caffeine if they have a history of heart disease for this reason. And it's also very important if this is something that's bothering you, or even if it's not bothering you, it's just good prevention, period, is to learn good stress management techniques like deep, slow breaths, meditation, yoga, which is considered kind of like a form of moving meditation, and exercise. All these things help lower your blood pressure. Some takeaways. Just know that hypertension is extremely common and that in a lot of people who have it, it's even more common not to control it. And that's a shame because we really shouldn't underestimate this disease. We want to limit our sodium. We want to eat plenty of fresh plants. You can limit your caffeine intake if you have, especially if you have other risk factors for heart disease, like high cholesterol and such. And you can learn some stress management techniques. Here's some references. As always, if you like this, please, please, please hit like and subscribe. And if you've got any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section below. Thank you.